Hello, my name is Greensville and welcome to Rank 6 Guide for Japan. With vehicles becoming more modern, all the tanks in this guide have laser rangefinders and two-plane stabilizers. But with the advancement in technology, you'll also be seeing more helicopters being at play along with more tanks using APFSDS rounds and some tanks having ATGMs and almost every IFV having ATGMs. So there's less what your armor can handle or deflect and more of who can see who first and deliver the killing blow. The first tank in this guide is the Type 87. It is the first modern domestic SPAAG made after the M42 was deemed obsolete. Using a modified chassis of the Type 74, this tank holds 3 crew members, 1 in the front and 2 in the turret. It has access to hunter-killer and a laser warning system, smoke grenades, driver and gunner NVDs, and also uses hydropneumatic suspension, and it can go in all directions and tilt. The weapon system on the Type 87 uses the same scene on the German Gepard. It uses 2 35mm Ehrlichen autocannons and has access to 4 different belt types using 3 different types of rounds, an APIT with a max penetration of 68mm, a HEIT with a max penetration of 5mm at any range with an explosive mass of 204 grams, and a pretty good APDS with a max penetration of 127mm. The tank has a very good ammo pool of 640 rounds, but it is limited to only the belts using APIT and HEIT. When equipping the APDS, the system has an auxiliary belt of 40 rounds. The gun can fire 165 rounds before the guns overheat, and the APIT and HEIT rounds can travel about 5 kilometers before the round self-detonates, but the APDS round can go as far as they want. The Type 87 is the first Japanese AA tank to have access to radar. It can ping 360 degrees from the vehicle, but it can only track about plus or minus 100 degrees from the point in the sky it is looking. The radar can be changed to view out from 10 kilometers to 40 kilometers, and it can lock onto aircraft and give you a lead indicator for you. For the APIT and HEIT belts, the lead indicator is limited to the 5 kilometer self-detonation range, but for the APDS rounds, the lead indicator stops at about 9 kilometers. The radar can be turned off and folded down by either key binding the radar on and off in the weaponry tab for ground vehicles in the controls menu, or pressing Y to open up the multi-functions menu and navigating to radar menu and turning it off. The Type 87 has a pretty good max speed of 53 km per hour and an okay reverse speed of 7 km per hour and can get up to mid-30s at a decent rate. The armor on this tank is quite thin. It uses a mix of RHA and aluminum alloy number 4050A. The lower front and upper front plate are 30mm of RHA. The upper and lower side hull, along with the back of the tank, is 20mm of RHA. The top of the hull is 15mm of RHA. The front of the turret is 25mm of aluminum alloy. The side of the turret is 20mm of aluminum alloy. The gun housing is 10mm of aluminum alloy. The top of the turret and the back of the turret is 15mm of aluminum alloy. And there is a 5mm RHA firewall between the crew and the engine. The method of playing this tank is to either take a tank hunting role or to go after enemy aircraft. For tank hunting, folding down your radar is preferred to lower your target's silhouette, and using the APIT belt or the APDS belt is what you want. The APIT belt will have no trouble taking out IFVs or thin armored MBTs in the side at 7.0 to 7.7 battle rating, and the APDS rounds will have little to no trouble penetrating any MBT or IFV in the side at battle rating 8.0 to 9. When going after air targets, using the APIT belt will be your belt of choice, as the APIT rounds will shred any flimsy aircraft or early helicopter you will face. It is always preferred to keep the APDS belt when going with any other belts, as the reload to switch is quick and will allow you to deal with an enemy tank trying to take you out. The downside of this tank is that the armor is very thin. Enemy machine gun fire and air can take you out. All overpressure mechanics will apply. Almost all the ammo for the gun sits in the middle of the tank, so any shot to the front of the hull or to the sides of the tank could hit the ammo, setting it off. The tracking indicator is not always very accurate. It will sometimes move on its own, so you will have to adjust as needed. And when bringing this tank up to battle rating 9.0 and higher, it cannot deal with helicopters sitting at helicopter spawn or high altitude close air support. The Type 89 is Japan's IFV and is the current last tank to get ATGMs. It holds 3 crew members that are fairly spaced out. It does have a decent amount of empty space millimeters, but the back is full of ammo. It has access to hunter-killer. Driver and the commander have NVDs, but the gunner has thermals. It also has smoke grenades, and once it is unlocked, it can use a UAV to fly around the battlefield to help spot enemy positions while in cover or on the move. The weapons system of the Type 89 uses a 35mm autocannon that has access to a pretty good APDS round with a max penetration of 127mm, and an OK HE round with a max penetration of 5mm at any range with an explosive mass of 204 grams. It also has two turret-mounted ATGM launchers mounted on either side of the turret that can fire a 152mm ATGM that has a max penetration of 700mm at any range with an explosive mass of 5.5 kilograms, and an OK ASM or anti-ship missile that has a max penetration of 35mm at any range with an explosive mass of 3.01 kilograms. The 35mm autocannon has a built-in magazine of 34 rounds and takes about 3 seconds to reload one round into the magazine, so be mindful of how many rounds you have before engaging a target. Unlike the Type 60, the Type 89's ATGMs are mouse guided, so it's easier to hit, and they have a 4-kilometer range, but will only reload once both rockets have been fired, and it takes about 12 seconds to reload, and they can be used to hit targets in close range, but will have to be mindful of the firing tube's location when firing. The Type 89 has a very good max speed of 70 kilometers per hour and a great max reverse speed of 43 kilometers per hour and can get up to 40 kilometers per hour at a decent rate. The armor is quite thin. The lower front plate and front armor is 35mm of RHA. The upper front plate is 20mm of RHA at 80 degrees, with the portion covering the engine being 15mm of RHA. The upper side hull and front cheek armor is 20mm of RHA. It does have 10mm RHA side skirts covering most of the 15mm RHA lower side hull. The back crew hatch is 15mm of RHA. The top of the hull is 10mm of RHA. The gun mantlet is 25mm of RHA at 74 degrees, along with the housing and gunner's optic being 25mm of RHA. The turret cheeks are 35mm of RHA. The side of the turret is 20mm of RHA. The back of the turret has a 5mm RHA external storage covering the 15mm RHA back, and the top of the turret and commander's cupola is 10mm of RHA, and there is a 5mm RHA firewall between the crew and the engine. The method of playing this tank is varied. It can be a long-range sniper with its ATGMs, along with spotting the enemy with the light tank spotting mechanic. It can do the same at mid-range, but will be able to use its gun to take out NBTs, light tanks, and IFVs. Or it can be a close-range flanker with the APDS rounds, will have no trouble penetrating tanks that you will face in the side, and with its speed you can set up an ambush or get to a key location to spot the enemy. The downside of this tank is that overpressure mechanics will apply, and with the weak armor, enemy air can take you out. If shot with Heat FS or HE to the ATGMs in the rocket housing, it could set it off, knocking you out, and any shot to the back half of the tank could hit the ammo, setting it off, knocking you out. The Type 16P is a prototype version of the Type 16 and is a light reconnaissance vehicle under the light tank classification. This long-wheeled tank holds 4 crew members, 1 in the front and 3 packed in the turret. It has access to hunter-killer along with a laser warning system, smoke grenades, driver NVDs, and newer generation thermals for the gunner and commander, along with getting the ability to deploy a UAV. The weapons system is a 105mm gun that has access to Heat FS with a max penetration of 400mm at any range with an explosive mass of 1.27 kilograms, a Heish with a max penetration of 127mm at any range with an explosive mass of 3.89 kilograms, and a pretty good APFSDS with a max penetration of 353mm. The Type 16P has a very good max speed of 100 kilometers per hour and a very good reverse speed of 36 kilometers per hour and can get up to low 40s at a decent rate. Being a fast reconnaissance vehicle, the armor is quite thin, along with being a prototype, so the armor packages are not installed. The front armor is 35mm of RHA, the upper front plate is 15mm of RHA at 82 degrees over the fuel tank and 77 degrees over the engine. The upper side hull, lower side hull, back of the tank and top of the hull and transmission housing is 15mm of RHA. The driver viewport is 20mm of RHA. 20mm RHA spaced armor is installed over the 40mm RHA gun mantlet. 5mm high hardness armor cones act as spaced armor for the 25mm RHA turret cheeks. 5mm high hardness armor is installed on both sides of the turret holding the smoke grenade tubes. 25mm of RHA for the turret side. 15mm of RHA for the back and top of the turret. The commander's cupola is 25mm of RHA. 8mm RHA plating is installed inside the tank for the upper side hull, making space armor. And 8mm RHA firewall is installed between the crew, the fuel tank, and the engine. The method of playing this tank is to play a medium to long range role using your speed to get to a key location to spot or snipe the enemy. The Heat FS round will have no trouble penetrating any of the enemy tanks in the side and some in the front, and the APFSDS round will have little to no trouble penetrating tanks in the front or side. The downside of this tank is that the armor is quite thin, so enemy air can take it out. Overpressure mechanics will apply to the top of the tank starting from the driver position and up, and to the tires and lower hull. When using Heat FS, your battle rating is 8.7, so more tanks with reactive armor and composite armor will come into play, so more than one shot will be needed. And when going up to 9.7, tanks with ERA will make an appearance, meaning that even with the APFSDS round, you'll either have to go for side shots or know where the armor on the enemy tank is thin enough for your rounds to penetrate in the front. And when going into combat with more than 16 rounds, the whole back of the tank is full of ammo, so a shot to the back or a over-penetrating shot to the front could hit the ammo, setting it off. But also, part of the first stage ammo is stored in the turret ammo rack, so a shot to the side or an over-penetrating shot through the engine could hit the ammo, setting it off, knocking you out. The Type 74E is an upgraded version of the Type 74C and is a later modification in the Type 74 series. This Type 74 is still a 4-crew tank that has access to smoke grenades and NVDs for the whole crew, along with an IR flashlight. This also has Hunter Killer and Hydropneumatic suspension. This variant gets a dozer blade that it can deploy, reducing its max speed to dig into soft terrain to make a tank trench. The weapon system is the same as the other Type 74s. It uses a 105mm gun, but drops the APDS and HEASH round, but has access to Heat FS with a max penetration of 400mm at any range with an explosive mass of 1.27 kilograms, and 2 APFSDS rounds, the first having a max penetration of 353mm, and the new one having a max penetration of 405mm. It has a pretty good max speed of 53 km per hour and a okay max reverse speed of 7 km per hour, and can get up to mid-30s at a decent rate. The armor on this tank is the same as the other Type 74s. The lower front plate and upper front plate is 80mm of RHA. The plate between the two is 100mm of RHA. The upper front armor and driver viewport is 50mm of RHA. The front cheek and side storage bin is 50mm of RHA. The upper side hull is 35mm of RHA. The lower side hull is 30mm of RHA. The back of the tank is 20mm of RHA. The top of the hull is 25mm of RHA. The turret mantlet is variable thickness cast armor. The turret cheeks and front half of the turret side armor is 132mm of cast armor. The back half of the turret side and front half of the turret roof is 67mm of cast armor. The back of the turret and the back half of the top of the turret is 37mm of cast armor. The commander's cupola is 80mm of cast armor. There is a 5mm RHA firewall between the crew and engine. The new piece of armor added is a 30mm structural steel dozer blade that acts as spaced armor for the upper part of the lower front plate and the lower half of the upper front plate when not deployed, and covers just the lower half of the lower front plate when deployed. The method of playing this tank is the same as the last Type 74, and preferring a medium to long range hill fighting role to use its suspension just to peek its gun out and the top of the turret. But with the addition of the dozer blade, you can now dig a hole on level ground and lower your tank so that most of it sits behind the berm, giving you cover and reducing enemy penetration values from incoming rounds that hit the berm. The downside of this tank is mostly the same as the last Type 74, being at battle rating 8.7, more tanks with reactive armor will come into play, so when using Heat FS, more than one shot may be needed. And when going up to 9.7, tanks with ERA will make an appearance, meaning meaning that even with APFSDS rounds, you'll either have to go for side shots or know where the armor on the enemy tank is thin enough for your rounds to penetrate. When in your tank trench, the berm, when shot, will take dirt with it. Sometimes destruction of the berm cannot be seen, so while you see an okay berm, the incoming round does not. If the round is strong enough, it can punch right through the berm, penetrating you. If you carry more than 17 rounds, it will be stored in the middle or front ammo rack, so a low shot to the side or front could hit the ammo, setting it off. And part of the first stage ammo is stored in the turret ammo rack, so a shot to the side or to the right half of your tank could hit the ammo, setting it off, knocking you out. The last tank in this guide is the Type 74F. This is the last tech tree modification of the Type 74 series. Still containing 4 crew members, this is exactly the same as the Type 74E, and having hunter killer, smoke grenades, whole crew NVDs, an IR flashlight, and hydropneumatic suspension. The difference is the mounting brackets for an EOD minesweeping cart are riveted to the front armor. The weapon system is the same 105mm gun that has access to the same rounds as the Type 74E. Like the Type 74E, it has a max speed of 53 km per hour and a max reverse speed of 7 km per hour. It can get up to mid-30s at a decent rate. The armor on this tank is exactly the same as the other Type 74s. The only difference is the 10mm cast armored brackets attached to the upper and lower front plate of the tank. It is to allow the installation of a minesweeping cart that is not in the game. The method of playing this tank is the same as the other Type 74s, preferring a medium to long range hillfighter role, so very little of your tank sticks out. The Heat FS will have little trouble penetrating enemy tanks in the side, and the APFSDS round will have little to no trouble penetrating enemy tanks in the side or front. The downside of this tank is the same as the Type 74E. When using Heat FS, as your battle rating is 8.7, more tanks with reactive armor will come into play, so more than one shot may be needed. When going up to 9.7, tanks with ERA will make an appearance, meaning that even with APFSDS rounds, you will still have to either go for side shots or know where the armor on the enemy is thin enough for your rounds to penetrate. The 10mm plates on the front provide little to no bonus to your armor, and the ammo position issue is the exact same, so be mindful on what parts of your tank can be seen by the enemy. That is all for the Rank 6 guide for Japan. These tanks in their own way can dominate the battlefield, but it relies on knowing where to hit the enemy, as sometimes you won't get to take a second shot. In the next guide, we will be covering the tanks in Rank 7, the current max rank in the game. If you liked this video or it was helpful to you, please leave a like. If you like something in this video or you want to see a more in-depth look at one of these tanks, please leave a comment. And if you would like to see the continuation of these guides, please subscribe. Thank you for watching.